can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders like the founders of P90X, Atari, many more, how they overcome big challenges in life and business. This is part of the Prosper Show e-commerce mastery series, where top sellers and experts teach you what really works to boost your e-commerce business. They have an amazing conference with some of the top Amazon sellers and industry leaders. We have Rob today. Our sponsor today is Rise25.com, which helps service professionals, doctors, lawyers, accountants, coaches create additional revenue streams and stop just trading time for dollars. We hold you accountable to achieve your biggest goals with a step-by-step roadmap. Go to Rise25.com to learn more. It's run by myself, co-founder John Corcoran, and Rob knows a thing or two about small businesses. And Rob Frohwein is co-founder of Kabbage. He co-founded it with the help of Kathryn, Petralia, and Marc Gorlin, and the Kabbage platform has funded more than, I don't want to get this wrong, Rob, $2.7 billion in loans.
Perfect.
They provide an advanced lending online platform to help small businesses borrow the funds they need. They've raised $236 million in equity since their formation. They have 350 employees across 5 offices in the U.S. and international. And a fun fact about Rob is when he was in college, one of his jobs was to draw blood, which he learned to do on comatose patients. Rob, thanks for joining me.
Thanks. That last part comes out being, people are going to be like, what is he talking about there? But so let me explain. I worked in a hospital in a variety of jobs going through college. And one of my first job was I worked in a lab and I drew blood. But of course I had no prior experience in drawing blood like most people, and other than vampires, I guess. And so the way you learn is they certainly show you first. And then there are some patients who are more willing or less objectionable. It didn't happen a lot. That sounds terrible, but I want to say that I never missed a vein of a comatose patient. So there's that.
That's good.
Yes.
I want to start off. There's a lot of interesting things. You have a lot of insights in the small business world. Tell me about the significance of the bottle of champagne and $50 million.
$50 million. Okay. Wow. There's that one. So when we closed our series,
I think this is one of my favorite parts of one of your talks. So if anyone has a chance to check out your talk, I thought this is a genius idea, not just for what you're going to talk about, but for business in general or staff or whoever it is.
Yeah, no, and it's about figuring out what your next milestone is and giving somebody a way to really memorialize that and shoot for it. But when we closed our Series A financing, which was in December of 2010, right before the holidays, Marc Gorlin, who you mentioned is one of my co-founders, had this brilliant idea. He presented each of the folks in the company at that time, and that time there was only 7 of us, with a bottle of champagne. And the bottle of champagne was nice. So we were like, hey, thank you. And should we open it or what should we do with it? And he said, no, you got to turn it and read it. And it said, there was a label and it said, to be opened by, and mine said Rob Frohwein, when Kabbage reaches a value of, and you mentioned the number $50 million, which at that time was a large multiple of what we had closed our first round at. And the idea was that we would hold this bottle on our desks until we reached that milestone. And when we did, we would open up the bottle, share it with everybody that was in the company at that time, which would obviously be hopefully more than the number of people that we had at that present moment, more than 7, and then issue a new bottle to everybody that was then there so that we could carry on that tradition. And by the way, whether it's 50 million or it's achieving some customer milestone or it's doing something else, doesn't make a difference. It's just something that you can really objectively reach for. And so we've now opened up 3 bottles of champagne. Everybody that was in the company after we opened the last one received the 4th in the series. And I think our last champagne bill was over $12,000,
Really?
Which we would not have been able to afford with our first when we first got that. But I think that went from to I don't know what 7 bottles of and it's good champagne. It was Veuve. But when we had well over 200 bottles to buy, it was a different story altogether.
Yeah, I love that. That's
Yeah,
great.
it was phenomenal, and you see a lot of champagne. There's a theme in this office, and that's one of them. So
Yeah, no, I love. Thanks for sharing that.
yep.
So how did you come up with the name Kabbage?
So Kabbage. I wish it was one of these great, like really cool stories, but we spent and I'm talking about Kathryn and Marc, and we had another guy I was good friends with, this guy Nick Steele, and the four of us spent like multiple nights in a bar over a period of a couple of weeks.
That's where all the good stuff happens. Yeah.
Yeah, which wasn't terribly unusual. And so we were trying to come up with a name for the company, and we wanted something that connoted money. And so we went through every imaginable like name you might come up with. And whenever we checked the domain name, it was always taken and owned by some company that actually built something. So we were never going to be able to buy the domain. And then Nick, who I mentioned a second ago, we were going through the various food groups. We moved from like bread and vine and all these other things to the fruit and veggies area. And he came up with cabbage. And cabbage, you may or may not know, is a slang term for money. So if you go to sort of the dictionary.com and you put in cabbage, you'll see the second or third entry is slang for money from the early 1900s. And cabbage with a C.com was $75,000. Cabbage with a K.com was $1,200.
Okay.
So we bought cabbage with a K, and now when we look at cabbage spelled the more traditional way, it
Doesn't make
like
sense.
No,
Yeah, it's misspelled. Yeah.
It's obviously a type. So you should all go into your dictionaries on your computers and laptops and add cabbage with a K to your dictionaries.
There you go.
So it's never misspelled.
What was the original idea? Was it exactly what it is now?
No, actually, my original idea. So this is literally my idea. I was thinking there was two things happening in my world at that time. Well, probably more than two things. But in terms of this concept, two things. One is I had been working with a company that was utilizing data that was pulled from online sources to identify counterfeit and fraudulent products sold online. Like, is that Tiffany lamp being sold on eBay or Amazon really a Tiffany lamp? And so it was product, so it was information about the product and information about the seller. And so we would make a determination, sort of a green, yellow, or red, whether that was likely counterfeit or stolen or not. And we did this on behalf of brands. And so it was my first exposure to leverage data that was on the internet for other than buying something or reading paper, reading the news. And so I had that experience. At the same time, I don't know why I was doing this, but I wondered, what would happen if a company like eBay bought a credit company? At that point, they hadn't bought Bill Me Later. When I came up with the idea, I said they would obviously fund the small businesses that are selling through their site. Same idea would hold true for Amazon. Right. So my first inkling of the idea was actually, say you wanted to sell something and you needed the money today. And I was thinking about it from a complete pedestrian consumer perspective. Like, I've got that surfboard in the garage that I haven't used for 10 years that's collecting dust, and it's probably worth $150, but I need $100 for the weekend. How would I go about doing that? So the original idea was really helping people get money for the sale in advance of the sale. That was the first idea. But it quickly evolved because we're not going to become a big company trying to fund the sale of surfboards, old surfboards. So we sort of evolved the idea, and it really became sort of a small business lender. Most importantly, that original idea was still intact, which was have the small business owner actually connect us to key data sources that related to how they run their business. And the theory went, if you could see how that small business was operating, how they were treating their customers, what their volume was, sort of the diversity of their customer base, things along those lines, you could make a pretty compelling decision about, how that business will handle credit and repayment of that credit. And that was really the fundamental concept. And so we've obviously evolved quite a bit from that juncture.
Yeah. I mean, you have, again, like you have very sophisticated probably technology and back end where you pull in a lot of sources. What did the first version look like?
Well, if you go to the Wayback Machine online, you'll see it. It was actually just, we started, and I know we talked about, you in your intro, you mentioned the Amazon sellers. That was a quick follow on. We started with eBay sellers, and all you needed to do was put in your eBay ID. and we would actually be able to get to a decision by just looking at your eBay ID.
Really?
Now, after the fact, you would have to add a few other pieces of information, but we could actually make a decision on whether to loan you money literally just on your eBay ID. And that was just accessing generally accessible APIs that eBay provided. And so it had the artwork on it had this like beautiful green field, like farming field. It looked like you're out in the middle of the, like I grew up in New Jersey and Pennsylvania area, and there's these beautiful rolling hills in Pennsylvania of farms, and that's what it kind of looked like. So we went with that route first.
Nice. Yeah, and so I want to talk about who is a perfect fit, like who's an ideal customer to use Kabbage right now?
It's a great question. Number one, small business. So we basically help small business access capital. So that's the most important thing. But one of our goals is actually not to have a situation where you necessarily are like, well, I'm a small business that kind of works for Kabbage, or I'm a small business that doesn't. At our best, we should be able to serve the extremes of small businesses, larger, smaller, different industries, all those types of things. I can tell you what our average customers have been in business for, between 5 and 10 years, have generate anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million. But I will tell you right now that we have customers that generate $25,000 a year in revenue. Yeah. And we have customers that generate $10 million a year in revenue, and everything in between. At this point, we've served nearly 100,000 small businesses. And if we've built the system properly, then we should be able to serve you, whether you're a very small business or you're a medium or a larger small business. And we should also be able to serve you regardless of the industry that you operate in, as long as it's legal. That's really our only restriction, if you will. So that's really who we serve. And one of the great things I remember from when we first started the business was I spent a lot of time at annual Amazon shows for sellers.
You would?
And I did. Yeah, I did. We spent a huge amount of time. We had a table, and we got to know. In fact, became friends with lots of folks who are Amazon sellers. Same for eBay. We attended all the eBay on location events around the country. And when I say we attended, it was really Marc, Kathryn, and I went there, and we would throw these phenomenal parties. So I think one thing that was really resonated with us early on was the fact that nobody was treating their business like a real business. And we would go in and we'd be like, hey, can we buy you a beer, or can we get you a soda, or can we get you something, and talk to you about your business? And literally the small business owners would be like, you're talking to me, right? I mean, that's so kind of you. And we're like, what are you talking about? You're doing a great thing. You should be treated with the kind of respect that any business gets.
They weren't used to like a red carpet treatment.
Nothing. And I mean, it was just shocking to us. And I think it was one of the things early on. It's great to start a business and to try to get it out there. And I have to say that until I went to those shows, I didn't realize it's not just about the fact that small businesses were not getting capital. It's the fact that small businesses weren't even getting respect in the market. And that's a real problem, because small businesses are responsible for 2/3 of all the new jobs that are out there, and responsible for more than half of the total revenue generated in the country every year outside of farming. And it's ridiculous that that they were treated like the ugly stepchild of the financial industry for so long.
So, Rob, how do you figure out who to give money to? I know you have a lot of probably complicated algorithm technology.
Yeah, I mean, the way we figured it out was it really was trial and error. One thing we recognized early on was that most small businesses, the decision whether to give them funds or not give them funds were based on their personal credit. And we had a theory going on in the beginning that wasn't the best indicator, because having had a small business prior to starting Kabbage, Kabbage was a small business for a long time, one thing I realized is that personal credit really gets injured during the process of starting and building a small business. And frankly, it gets hurt during the process of running it, because you're going to have sort of cash flow changes and you're going to rely on personal credit to get you there. And so we figured it wasn't the best measure, but what we had to do was two things. One is give us access to a whole bunch of data, and then also let us know how your personal credit is, so that we could create a baseline effectively. And then once you create a baseline, then you can move away, or at least somewhat away, from relying on any sort of personal credit information. And so the data that we use principally in underwriting is based on information that's not contained in a personal credit bureau, the small business owner, because these other data sources are much better indicators of a likelihood of repayment. So we build models. And by the way, just to put this in perspective, I was not in this industry before I started Kabbage. And so all of the knowledge, the entirety of the information that I have about credit and risk, I've learned on the job. Like,
I think in the talk, you put up a slide about the bad things venture capitalists have said about you during the process. And one was, maybe it was about I think it was why is Rob CEO? He's a lawyer or something.
Yeah, exactly. And that's about the best thing they said that day. I remember that one very, very clearly. We, Marc, Kathryn, and I, and you get all these weird motivations to keep you going when you first start a business, because that's pretty much the reward you get when you first start a business, is just your fantasies of what happens when you succeed. And so our thought on that, I remember the specific person. What we wanted to do was, once the company succeeded, was buy the building where his office was located, and over the weekend paint the entire thing green with the Kabbage logo, so that he'd come in and that's all he can. Like literally hallways, everything just said Kabbage everywhere and was green. Just either that or buy the properties surrounding his house and put up a Kabbage.
I love where your mind goes. The fantasies of this.
That and taking blood from comatose patients, and then you start wondering like why I'm even running this company.
So, anyways, I interrupted you. How you figure out who to give money to, and you were saying that you learned everything obviously on the job, or doing this. And before we started, you talked about one thing about social importance that you pull in. What's the important, like, how do you pull in the social aspects that gives you any type of data that will lead if you should give this person money or not?
Yeah, and so when it's not your personal Facebook account or your personal Twitter account, many small businesses, or most small businesses, as your audience probably realizes, utilize Twitter and Facebook and other social media channels to keep in touch with their customers, to talk about their business, to promote new products, services they're offering, to respond to complaints or comments that folks may have. And
I gotcha. Yeah,
and
because that's a risk factor.
It's risky. Like the theory was, again, when we went out there, is if you're keeping in touch with your customers and you're active in doing that, you're probably running a better business than somebody who does not give us access to that data. Yeah. That's not to say that they're not. It's just to give us access. And so that was the theory, and it's actually proved out. We actually launched that concept in September of 2011. We called it social climbing, which was one of the naming conventions I was very proud of.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Even junior high people would know what that means.
There you go.
Yeah. What are some other big risk factors that you look at?
So, what we're looking at principally, we're looking at three things, but we ask them in different ways. So we're trying to understand the capacity of your small business. And that's really for understanding sort of the inflows and the outflows, the profitability, the best picture we can paint of the profitability of the business, and then how robust it is. So that's capacity. And you can determine that a bunch of different ways through a bunch of different channels. Certainly, if you're tapping into Amazon, you know how robust the sales are or not robust they are, and how they varied over time. And I'll talk about variation over time in a second. The second piece is what I'd call the character. And what that means is, if we give you a loan and you can afford to make the repayment, will you actually make it? And so that's a little bit of a litmus test. Yeah, and by the way, it's something you've got to assess. And then the third piece is what you would call consistency or stability. The old way that folks did that was they said, okay, a business that's been in business for 9 years is more likely to be around the 10th year than a business that's been around for a month is going to be around for 2 months.
Right.
And certainly longevity of business is one way to look at it, but you can also look at customer concentrations. You can look for other factors of stability that might indicate, how long you've been in the same location. You can try to figure out, what's been the trend of employee growth over time. And by the way, lots of our small business customers don't have any employees or only have one employee. So that might not be a relevant factor, and they might be the most stable business in the world because they have, this same, 100 customers have been buying from them for the last 10 years. And so those customers are going to be around for another 10 years. And guess what? Customers don't die off quickly. You don't see churn in their customer portfolio to whom they're shipping or something along those lines. So there's lots. So these are actually the same questions that banks ask small business owners, and they try to get information on. We just happen to get that information from sources,
data that basically tells the story.
Tells the story, and by the way, it tells it on an ongoing basis, so we stay connected to that data, so we understand whether the stability of the business has changed. We understand whether the character of the small business owner has changed. We understand if the capacity of that business has changed over time, which is an important dimension that's not typically taken into account by traditional financial institutions.
Yeah, Rob, a big question I have. So someone gets the money. And then obviously they're going to use it for something. I'm curious because you see a lot of different stories probably. What's the biggest mistakes people make after receiving the funds?
Well, I think first of all there's a lot more mistakes on deciding to take funds in the first place. Right?
You mean they're approved and they don't take them?
Well, no. I mean, no. So are you saying what are the biggest mistakes that we make when we've provided funds, or the biggest mistakes that customers make when they receive it?
Exactly,
so the first thing is, and it happens either before or after, is they don't really think of how to use the money properly. We are always big fans of folks that use money for revenue generating activities. If you want to go buy a tractor for your farm, or you want to go buy a conference room table for your office, or something along those lines, we're probably not the best source of capital for you. It's important that customers are focused on taking our funds and using them as growth-oriented funds, right? Something that's going to help their business grow, something that's either going to generate an immediate return or a significant return over a reasonable period of time. And I actually think that's a better way, because a lot of people, you don't need, and I've never been one, you don't need marble in your office. You don't need a mahogany desk. You don't need, the fanciest, latest, greatest monitors, in your office or whatever it may be. You've got to always approach your business. And trust me, I'm like, in 2001, I basically quit, didn't quit my job. I didn't really get fired, but I kind of got laid off in the connection with the .com bust. Like, my company basically went out of business. Not my company, but the company I was working for. Right. So I was really gone, right? So, and I made a decision then that I was going to work for myself and build a business. And, that scrappiness is something you always have to have as a small business owner, and you can't ever lose it. You can't lose sight of the way you started the business. And I think the biggest mistakes that people make is they talk themselves into thinking they need something that they really don't need.
They're making purchases that are not revenue generating activities, and they can probably do a scrappier version of.
Yeah, always be scrappy. I mean, to me, that is a very, very important way to think about stuff. I still do it now, even though we're a much larger company now. That attitude I love. I mean, we all are at desks. We don't have fancy offices. We don't do anything along those lines. I believe in scrappiness in the business, and you have a responsibility yourself. You have a responsibility to your family. You have a responsibility to whoever lends you money. You have a responsibility to your other employees. You just have it to be really conscious about that stuff.
And I'm sure with the individual people who get money from Kabbage, everyone has varying interest rates, right? Based off of their, whatever their history is. How do you figure out what the interest rate is for individuals or for the companies?
Sure. No, absolutely. I mean, it goes back to the questions that we ask, which I mentioned a moment go between capacity, character, and consistency or stability. So we make judgments based on those factors, and customers fall into different bands, and those bands are sort of pricing tiers, if you will. And what it does is it predicts the likelihood. It predicts sort of the borrowing capacity, but also predicts the likelihood of non-payment or non-performance. And what we try to do with our customers over time is we try to monitor their performance, and by monitoring that, they can actually migrate up and end up getting, they have the opportunity to get lower fees or larger lines, and ultimately that's the path that you want to go on.
Yeah, is that like what's the most commonly asked questions to you? Is it what's the interest rate? What are the most commonly asked questions from businesses asking Kabbage how it works?
Usually it's I need more money. Can I have money?
I need more money. Can I have money?
Yeah, I mean it's
Right.
and look, it's natural, right? You want to put your business in the best position it can be, so having access to capital can do that. But what we don't do, which a lot of other folks do, is they ask them, how much do you need or how much do you want? And then they take them through an underwriting process, and then they either tell them, yes, I can do that, or here's, I can do more than that, or I can do less than that. We actually let the data speak for itself, and we come back and we say, hey, Jeremy, your business qualified for $25,000. Congratulations. Now, you might have it in your mind that you needed 10 or you needed 50, but you've qualified for 25, and if you only need 10, that's all you have to take. What we don't want to do is put ourselves in a conflicted position with a customer, which is you ask for 50, we have to come back with the disappointing news that it's only going to be 25. And we've done this based on our calculation of the right amount of risk in the relationship. And so it's actually beneficial to the small business to listen to sort of what our models say, because it sizes it accordingly, and based on what we see businesses of that size can affordably repay, and the amount of money they should be receiving at a particular juncture in their lives. And that's based off of many hundreds of thousands of loans that we've made.
Yeah, Rob. I mean, a company like yours, like Kabbage, takes on a huge amount of risk because you're obviously lending money to different companies. Obviously, you minimize your risk with all the algorithms, but I mean, there's always going to be a default rate of people who don't pay back. I'm really curious about if you can think of any businesses you thought this is a slam dunk. This is like absolutely, this company is going to thrive. They're going to pay back in probably shorter period of time than what they say, and what ended up they didn't. So I know you can't mention names and everything.
All the customers who have ever defaulted fall into that category. Look,
really?
At certain point, you always expect that a certain number are not going to be able to repay,
right?
Or not going to repay, even if they can't afford to repay.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be that factor, but you don't go into it. You go into it with the expectation. You sort of have to believe that there's positive intent in the world. That folks are going to do well, are going to be good people, and so we sort of take that. Look, there were businesses early on that we took risks on. I remember we made when we were only a company that the highest lines we were providing were $20,000 or $40,000. We went to a few businesses, a couple of them here locally, and gave them $100,000. I think I'm sorry, there was two of those businesses. One was here, and one was actually out in California, and both ultimately defaulted. And so I would say that we were surprised. And you know what? We didn't really.
Why did they default? I mean, it comes to the question, why small businesses fail, right? You hear these crazy stats, 9 out of 10 small businesses fail. You probably have your finger on the pulse of that better than anyone. So I'm curious, what are some of the reasons why they failed?
Well, look, I'm sitting in my seat. I don't ever know for sure. I know the people that we lent to in those two situations were actually really good people because we knew them and we took the risk with them. We personally knew them.
Right.
And so, one person got way ahead of their skis, and they tried to grow too fast. That was one that was pretty evident. And so they took on a lot of obligations that they shouldn't have taken on. And by the way, I don't think our cap is responsible for that. But it harkens back to what I said a moment ago, which is you have to borrow money for the right reasons, not for the wrong reasons.
Right.
Because you can't treat a loan like revenue or like profit. You got to treat a loan like,
well, it's accumulating interest every day. So
exactly, and a lot of people treat it like income, and you can't treat it
really
like
they'll
well, I mean, you know, all of a sudden you got $50,000 in your account that you didn't have yesterday. What am I going to do with $50,000? Well, you know what? That chair is so ugly, and I've been dying to get a new chair. I'm going to go get a new chair.
I have the
money. It's only $500, $400, whatever it is. I'm going to get a really nice chair. So you go and get the chair. Your chair doesn't make a difference. Actually, right. I tend to think a chair does make a difference. That's probably a bad example because my back always kills me. But so a chair makes a difference. But the aesthetics of a chair don't make a difference.
Right.
You know, the comfort.
You can get a $50 cushion to be on the chair to help your back.
Get a pillow, get those beads that you put on the back of the chair. So I think, you know, one thing is, again, so I think there's this concept of why businesses fail. It's pretty simple. And by the way, I'm somebody who's had businesses who failed. So I speak from a position of knowledge. You know, you don't get to real revenue either quickly enough or significantly enough. You know, somehow, you know, you've got to figure out how to monetize a business and how to turn it into revenue.
The customer flow is lacking.
Yeah, and or the product market fit, right? So you haven't quite hit the market the right way, or you're so focused on the ideals or principles of your business, you know, and you don't listen to the signs that nobody wants that, nobody cares, right? You know, and so you've got to make that, and then you've got to be unbelievably disciplined about expenses, and got to really know how to categorize your expenses, track them over time, and also manage to them. So you can build some trend lines, and you know you're moving in the right direction. That's when you know you can buy the new chair. Right. Yeah. So when you get to a certain point where you go, okay, I've hit this milestone, you know, we're actually ahead of ourselves from a metrics perspective. And I'll put it in Kabbage example, if you'll indulge me for a moment.
Yeah, go ahead.
We have 4 expenses in our business. That's it. 4 categories of expense. We have the cost to acquire customers and have them utilize the product. So that's one big expense. We have the cost of bad debt, people not paying us back. You brought that up already.
Yeah.
We have our own cost of capital, which is how much we have to pay to borrow money. And then we have the other cost of what I call other OpEx, and that means non-sales and marketing, overhead, people, tables, chairs, utility bills.
350 people across.
All other people. Yeah. So those are the 4 expenses. And I look at those expenses as percentages of, and you can make it, if you're a small business owner, they're a percentage of something. They're a percentage of your revenue. Yeah. They're a percentage of your orders. They're a percentage of something that's meaningful in your business. And once you understand the categories of expense and you track them as a percentage of something, then you can manage to them. And so, you know, we can see how our cost to acquire customers either goes up or down over time. We can see how our OpEx goes up or down over time. We can see how our non-performing loans or our bad debt, how that behaves over time, and we can manage to those things. And that's what you really need to do. And businesses fail because they don't understand the top line and the bottom line, and they don't draw the parameters as to what success is. That's a very scientific and a very numbers-based concept. And I think people, I'm like back and forth because I was always a guy. I've always been an entrepreneur. I was the kind of kid at 8 or 9 that carried around a notebook, and I wrote down ideas that ever came up, and I still have that book. And there's many terrible ideas in there. And but I think people, sort of romanticize the concept of starting a business, but, ultimately you've got to figure out how to, if you really believe in it, you've got to make it into, you got to turn it into something, that where you can really, from a metrics-based perspective, analyze it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that breakdown, because probably I would think a lot of people don't necessarily know the cost it takes to acquire a customer in general. So the cost to acquire a customer, the debt, cost of capital, and then overhead. I mean, I think that applies to any business, really.
And I totally agree with you. And it's so funny. I watch Shark Tank a lot with my family, and which I love that show. And Lori Grenier is our spokesperson, so I especially love it.
She's your spokesperson?
Yeah, she is. Not my personal one. She's not going around saying Rob's great or anything. She's the spokesperson for Kabbage.
I didn't realize that, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So she's done that. She's if you're then we're shameless advertisers on many radio shows, and so she's her commercials run quite often.
That's great. Yeah.
Now, she's been fantastic. But one thing I've always they always ask the question, or often they ask the question is, what's the cost to acquire? And how much does it cost to acquire? Right. And that's really, it is an absolutely fundamentally critical. And by the way, you need to differentiate in your mind what the cost to acquire is when you're first starting the business and what your cost to acquire is when the business is up and running, because you're always initially going to get a handful of customers, or even more than a handful of customers, pretty easy, right? Because so like when we started Kabbage, we had gone to all these shows, right? So we were able to get 100 customers or 150
You targeted
customers.
the eBay sellers and the Amazon sellers.
Yeah, we did that, but that's not 10,000 customers, right? That's 100 or 200 customers. So the question is, the cost to acquire the first 100 or 200 is vastly different than the cost to acquire the 10,000th customer. So you've got to really, and not everybody's business needs 10,000 customers, but it might be 3 customers versus 30, right? So you've got to figure out what that is. And realize what there's this saying that somebody taught me some time ago. You've got to figure out whether the juice is worth the squeeze. And so, that's one thing we pay close attention to.
Right.
How hard is it to acquire customers? And, are you asking customers to do unnatural acts in working with you?
Rob, how do you even decide to choose or even have a spokesperson?
Well,
and then how do you choose her?
How do we choose her? All right. So spokesperson was, I have a theory. Am I allowed to curse here?
Sure.
Okay. So I always say there's 1,000 shitty ways to acquire a small business customer. And that doesn't mean that means it's very hard to find the audience, the small business audience, because they're everywhere. I mean, it's not like all the small business owners, congregate in one place at one time every week. It doesn't happen, and they don't also talk to each other that often, right? So it's not like,
They're very siloed.
One small business owner, their only 4 friends also run small businesses. No, in fact, it's probably their other 4 people work in some large corporation or something, right? So my theory is, and you're gonna have to repeat your question, because I got so on a tangent.
No,
Jeremy.
I keep going on a tangent.
That's all right.
I like that.
Once upon a time, I wanted to start a company called Tangents International because of the way my brain works.
It was how you choose a spokesperson, but how you got to Lori.
Yeah, so we developed a pretty comprehensive marketing approach where we worked through lots of different channels. Online, we use some traditional channels like radio, I mentioned, and direct mail. We have a business development channel where we partner with organizations that have large numbers of small businesses as their customers. So we have all these different channels. But and I saw a lot of people advertising. I actually saw my competition advertising on Shark Tank because we watch Shark Tank.
Right.
And then I looked at that and I was like, that's not the best way to advertise. I didn't think those probably, and I didn't know for sure, but I didn't think those were probably very successful ads. But I thought the personalities were. And so,
because you thought it was, I think where you were going with it was, it wasn't like there's a lot of crappy ways to get a customer, and that was not targeting where the small, I mean, there's some small businesses maybe that watch it, but there's just a lot of regular people. So you're not specifically targeting small businesses if you advertise on Shark Tank type of thing.
Absolutely. And it was extremely expensive advertising. And so we thought it would be better to partner with somebody like Lori, who, is, sort of the epitome of a great success, somebody who started a small business, grew it into a large enterprise, has an extremely distinctive voice, but also is somebody who has been generally regarded as sort of the friendly shark or the warm shark.
Right.
People love her.
So she was on your top of the list.
Yeah, absolutely. She sort of had represented all the factors that were important to us, and she represented all the qualities that were important to us. And so that's why that happened. And we tested it, and it worked great. People loved it, so much so that our competitor on deck signed Barbara.
Really?
But we have Lori, so there's that.
How hard is it to strike a deal with a shark? like Lori?
I have to give Victoria, who's our head of sales and marketing, really the credit. She's the one that made the contact. She's the one that put that together. It's actually pretty complicated.
I would
And
think
by the
so.
way, Lori is extremely involved in the process, which I thought was great. I mean, I had many, many, many discussions with her and text conversations with her, going back and forth at times. But what was great about it was she was personally invested, and
Yeah.
so
It's her name.
it's
You
her
know,
name, and so
yeah.
she cares who represents it, and she also cares that it's a success. And I think the other thing is you need people who are, because these things are not that scientific that you know exactly how you're going to work with the person, exactly when you're going to need them to do what.
Yeah.
And you've got to have people that can think a little flexibly, and she fortunately is one of those people.
Yeah. Rob, thank you. That was great. I want to hear about a couple success stories.
Okay.
Some of your favorite success stories from people obviously utilizing the capital and doing great things. Who are some that come to mind? If you can't name the company, just like the scenario.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a great company that's based out of the near, not far from Seattle. That is a kind of a farm to table. Are you familiar with like Plated or
Yeah.
I forget the other one, Blue something or whatever?
Yeah, Blue Apron, I think it's
Blue
called.
Apron.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a couple of those companies. This is a company run by two women who were in different fields before they started, and the company's name is Acme, which makes me think of the Roadrunner.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Right from cartoons growing up. But they actually took our $1 billionth dollar. So they borrowed the billionth dollar that we put out, and so they won this award. And we had this opportunity. They came in for what was called a business makeover. And what was really fascinating about that is I learned way more about business from them than they could have possibly learned from me when they came in, because the way they thought about their business was just fantastic. They used Kabbage to expand. They were having problems getting a bank loan, but what they had is they had created this system where they sourced local products and turned them into sort of local meals. And I'm sure they're continuing to do that right now. But they basically built a multi-million-dollar business, and they did it in an interesting way. They didn't raise venture capital. They didn't try to expand nationally. They basically said, we've got to source product from local farms and local companies. And so naturally, if you're going to do that, you're gonna be more focused in the geography that you work. I think they have now like 5 or 6 locations, all concentrated in the upper Northwest. And the other thing that was really fascinating is they identified some challenges with the other companies that we just mentioned, including the amount of packaging that is delivered with that product. I mean, forget fossil fuels. That will put an end to the environment before fossil fuels will, because the sheer amount of styrofoam and plastic that's used is incredible. So they're also a very eco-friendly company, and they deliver in these like wood crates, and they also build a delivery system, Uber-like delivery system, where people in the local community come pick it up and deliver it to the folks, and a thing where then those people put the boxes back outside and they bring them back to their business. And they just built a great business, and they just they figured out how to put the meals together in a way that it could be profitable. They just executed really well. So that's probably the
Can we
success
mention their name, or so we
Sure.
give them credit and link to them?
Absolutely.
What's the
Well, Acme, I think it's Acme Farms and Table, but I will get you the exact.
Okay, because I want to make sure whoever's listening to this, they link up in the show notes the actual domain for them. So
that's great. I'm looking them up right now.
AcmeFarmsAndKitchen.com. Is that right?
That sounds. Did you look that up?
Yep.
And
Acme Farms and Kitchen.
Is it in Washington State?
Let's see here. If my internet was not, it looks like it's Shop, Cook, Eat, Acme Farms.
Yeah, that's
and
it.
Acme Farms and Kitchen.com.
Yes.
That's
them.
right. So
Phenomenal.
do they use it to just expand? What do they need the money for? I feel
I
I'm
think,
talking like Shark Tank. Like, what do you need the money for? But,
one thing they've got to do is they had to move into larger spaces. They had to buy, better refrigeration. They had to source, products that, they could deliver, the boxes and the crates and the other sort of, more tangible ingredients that were in there. So they used it for a variety of purposes, and I think they used it for a period of time. I couldn't tell you right now whether they are utilizing the funds on an ongoing basis, but they used it for what they needed it, and that's really the key. The key is to, if you're a company that needs it for a point in time, that's great, and it's very episodic for a specific reason. If it's, I hear a little like bouncing on the. Is our connection still with us?
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
Okay, good, yeah. good. So bottom line is they needed the funds for a variety of purposes, but I don't know that they need it on a permanent basis, and that's a great customer for us. Somebody that again knows specifically what they need it for, and it's to grow the business. They're they're an organization that really understands the benefit of managing expenses.
Yeah. Rob, thank you so much for sharing this. I think everyone should check out the correct spelling, Kabbage.com with a K. And, are there any other places we should point people towards on your site or on the web?
Yeah, I think the only other couple things that would be cool would be, first of all, check out our blog. It's all about small business, and it's not pumping cabbage and taking money and taking a loan. It's literally just business advice, which is really hugely helpful. And then the next piece is check out Kabbage Kares, all with Ks. So Kabbage with a K, Kabbage Kares. We're incredibly community-minded. We have multiple events every single month to participate. We really are big believers in giving back.
What are some of the events?
So we've twice a year, every year since 2011, we've gone to a place called Camp Twin Lakes, which is a camp for kids that have terminal and chronic illnesses and other life challenges to do a lot of work there as a company. We spend times with for animal shelters, with packaging products for the hungry. We've spent time in cleaning up the Chattahoochee River. So we're literally rafting down a local river here and picking up trash. We've done events with Easter seals for kids that have other challenges as well. So there's been just a huge number for refugees. We've done events. We've done, you name it, we've done it.
That's awesome.
And we usually support organizations that are important to our employees or important to our customers. And so we're big fans of supporting both.
So is that Kabbage Kares is Kares?
You got it. Okay. But you could check it out. It should be on the either part of the about part of our page. But it's just to learn a little bit more about what's important to us, because I think a lot of companies talk about community involvement and things along those lines. We actually are exceedingly proactive about it, and we're big proponents of participating in the community.
Great. Everyone should check out Kabbage.com with the K and KabbageCares.com, both with Ks.
No, Kabbage Kares is just part of our Kabbage.com site.
It is? Okay.
It's a good point. Somebody might reserve it now, so thanks for that.
So it's not KabbageCares.com. It's just a part of Kabbage.com.
It's just part of Kabbage.com. It's part of the company.
No one squat on that domain right now.
There you go. I don't know that you'd get much for it, so good luck.
Thank you, Rob. Anything else that we didn't talk about?
I'm sure there's lots we didn't talk about, but we'll save it for the next time.
Thank you, Rob. Greatly appreciate it.
Take care. Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of the day.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like $100 grand.